3 soil scientists flew in from the university. They had sensors, laptops, and a $40,000 analysis kit. They walked the field for 2 hours. Then the lead engineer turned to the farmer's son and said it plainly. "This land is finished. Nothing will grow here for 20 years. The old man standing behind them hadn't said a word the whole time. He waited until they packed up their equipment. Then he walked to his barn and started an engine nobody had heard run in 11 years. The scientists were still in the driveway when the smoke rose from the field. His neighbor leaned on the fence. "What is that thing?" "A chisel plow. 1967. They stopped making them in 1971. "Does it work?" The old man didn't answer. He just kept driving. 2 seasons later, that field outproduced every acre in the county. That is how the story is told in the diners along Highway 20. But to understand the absolute weight of the execution at the end, you have to stand on that barren dirt the day it all fell apart. November. Cold air. Sky like a sheet of rusted corrugated iron. The north wind cut through the dead stalks, making a dry scratching sound. 500 acres of the Hutchins family farm, once the crown jewel of the county, now a parking lot of baked clay. Dr. Arthur Vance stood dead center in the field, 40 years old, wearing a pristine technical shell jacket, Swede boots that had never touched actual mud. He used to analyze surface density for corporate mining projects. Now he was the lead asset evaluator for Apex Agri Capital, a hedge fund in a tailored suit looking for bleeding farms to swallow whole. Vance dragged a manicured finger across an iPad Pro screen. Red zones flared on the radar map. He clicked his tongue, shook his head. "Soil density at 18 inches is 2.1 grams per cubic centimeter," Vance said. His voice carried the quiet arrogance of a man holding an expensive master's degree. "To put that in perspective, son, that density is equivalent to poured concrete. Corn roots cannot pierce concrete. Rainwater cannot penetrate it." David swallowed hard. Merle's son, 28 years old. He shoved his hands deep into his jacket pockets to hide the shaking. David was a man of the modern era. He believed in cloud data, satellite mapping, heavy machinery, and now the data was telling him he had murdered a 4-generation legacy. "But doctor," David stammered, "we used the chemical schedules. We ran the moisture algorithms. Why did it turn to rock?" Vance smiled, a thin, practiced line of pity. He pressed the power button on his tablet. Click. The sound snapped sharp in the quiet field. "Because of your modern methods, David. You hired 14-ton tractors to roll back and forth across this field for 5 straight years. Every pass compressed the subsoil. You ran modern disc harrows. They chewed up the top 6 inches and made it look pretty. But underneath, you created a hardpan. You suffocated this land. No oxygen, no microbes. It's a corpse. Silence. Just the wind whistling against the dead corn stalks." Vance reached inside his jacket. He pulled out a thick blue stock folder. He extended it toward David. "Apex Capital is willing to help. We need flat acreage for a solar array. Our offer is $1,200 an acre. Scrap dirt prices. Sign it, David. Pay off the bank. Otherwise, come spring, the only paper you'll see is a foreclosure notice. $1,200. An open insult. Prime agricultural land in this state hadn't dropped below $8,000 in a decade." David looked at the dirt, then at the gold-plated pen in Vance's hand. He reached for it. A hand caught his wrist, calloused, knotted with thick veins, cold as cast iron. Merle, the 72-year-old farmer, had been standing there the whole time, a statue carved from old oak, faded baseball cap, denim jacket worn white at the elbows. He didn't blink when the data was read. He didn't flinch at the insulting price. His eyes, the color of a bruised winter sky, locked onto the corporate evaluator. Merle didn't yell. He didn't beg. He didn't curse. He simply reached out and took the blue folder from Vance's hand. He folded it in half, then in half again. He shoved it into the breast pocket of Vance's expensive technical jacket. "Nice boots," Merle said. His voice was gravel scraping against steel. "Don't get mud on 'em walking off my property." The smile vanished from Vance's face. He adjusted his collar, lifted his chin. "Stubbornness doesn't change radar data, old man," Vance snapped. "The dirt is dead. That paper was a lifeline. When the bank calls next week, you'll be begging me to drive back out here." Merle didn't answer. He turned his back. He walked toward the rusted red tin barn at the edge of the property. Slow, deliberate steps, leaving the man with the $40,000 equipment standing alone in the wind. David chased after him, panic in his chest, his boots slipping on the hard clay. "Dad, he's right. I read the reports." David's voice cracked. "Those 14-ton rigs we leased packed it down. We don't have the cash for deep penetration chemical treatments. It's concrete. If we don't sign, we lose it all." Merle stopped at the heavy wooden doors of the barn. He dug into his denim pocket, pulled out a case-bone-handled pocket knife, folded the blade out. He looked down and began scraping the dried clay from the welt of his work boot. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. "Your problem, David," Merle said. He didn't look up. "Is you listen to men in clean shirts talk about mud. You don't touch the mud. Universities teach theory. They sell it in expensive textbooks. But they leave out the brutal morphology of compaction. When you run corporate disc harrows, the steel blades spin at high speed. They chop the top 6 inches, fluff it up, make it look beautiful for drone photography. But right below that spinning blade is a silent murder. The 14-ton weight of the machine presses down. Year after year, pass after pass, the pressure builds exactly at the 18-inch mark. It forms a biological concrete, a hardpan. Corn roots hit that wall and turn sideways. They starve. Rainwater hits it and pools on the surface until the sun boils it away. Men like Vance look at that wall and see a dead asset. They prescribe $50,000 of synthetic acids. Or they tell you to walk away. Merle's generation survived the 1980s farm crisis. They knew a different truth. You don't fix a blockage by polishing the surface. You pierce it. You inflict a deep necessary pain to the core so the body can breathe again. Merle folded the knife. "Put it away." He grabbed the rusted iron handle of the barn door and pulled. Screech. The hinges fought back, then gave way. The smell of old grease, rotting straw, stagnant time. Gray light filtered through bullet holes in the tin roof, landing on a massive shape in the darkest corner, covered by a dry, rotted canvas tarp. Merle grabbed the canvas, ripped it back. Dust exploded into the light. There it sat, a 1967 Oliver chisel plow, faded green paint peeling off heavy-gauge iron. No hydraulic depth sensors, no pressure gauges, no GPS wiring, just a massive V-shaped steel frame fitted with rows of rigid shanks. At the end of each shank sat a cast steel chisel point, curved, sharp, like the claws of a dormant grizzly. David coughed, waving the dust away. "What is that piece of junk going to do?" "It's too light. It's a third the width of the modern rigs. It'll take a month to run 500 acres, and it doesn't have turning blades. It won't flip the topsoil." Merle walked to an iron toolbox. He pulled out a heavy pipe wrench, slapped the heavy steel into his open palm. "That is exactly why it's going to save us," Merle said. He knelt beside the frame, fit the wrench around a rusted bolt on the first shank, metal grinding on metal, a heavy rhythmic clack. Your modern rigs flip the dirt sideways. "Makes it look pretty, packs the bottom tight," Merle grunted, pulling hard on the wrench. "This Oliver, the shanks are set at a 43-degree angle. You pull this, it doesn't flip a damn thing. It sinks straight down, 24 inches deep. It shatters that corporate scientist concrete into pieces, but it leaves the top layer right where it is." He stood up, ran a calloused hand over the cold, pitted steel of the chisel point. "They stopped making them because fields looked ugly after you ran them. Messy. The suits like it clean. Nature doesn't need clean, son. Nature needs fractures." Merle walked past the Oliver toward his 1980 John Deere 4440. Pure mechanical torque, not a single microchip to fail. He climbed up and cranked the ignition. Black diesel smoke belched toward the rafters. He backed it up, dropping the 3-point hitch to lock onto the Oliver. Before we watch the absolute arrogance of an Ivy League expert get torn to shreds under rusty iron wheels, take a second. How many times have the experts in your life looked at your surface scars and told you you were finished? How many times have people measured your worth with shallow tools? If you believe in the quiet power of old-school resilience and doing the work when nobody is cheering, hit the subscribe button. We are building a community of people who refuse to be defined by someone else's data. Now let's get back to the frozen dirt of Iowa. The first cut is about to happen. Morning fog clung to the dead stalks, cold enough to see your breath. Frost coated the tractor's hood. Vance's black SUV rolled to a stop on the shoulder of the county road. He stepped out. He wasn't alone today. Beside him stood a man in a gray wool suit, the bank's regional liquidator. They had the foreclosure paperwork in a leather briefcase. They came expecting submission. They expected the old man to be broken by a sleepless night of panic. The ground vibrated against the soles of Vance's suede boots. A low, violent thudding rolled across the flat landscape. A straight-six diesel engine under maximum load. A thick pillar of black exhaust cut through the white fog. Merle sat in the cab of the John Deere. Behind him, the 1967 Oliver chisel plow had its steel claws buried deep in the dirt. Vance leaned against the hood of his SUV. He pulled a pair of binoculars from his jacket, looked through the lenses, let out a sharp bark of laughter. A rusted chisel plow from the 60s? He's out of his mind, Vance muttered to the banker. The attack angle on that scrap metal can't penetrate a 2.1 density hardpan. The shanks will snap, or he'll blow the transmission. What does he think he's proving? Inside the tractor cab, Merle didn't look at the road. He didn't see the men. His jaw was set, hard lines carved into his face, hands gripping the wheel. The tractor shuddered violently. The steel points hit the 18-inch mark. They hit the biological concrete. A horrific screeching sound tore from the implement frame, metal screaming against rock. The massive rear tires of the John Deere began to spin. Wheel slip. White rubber smoke mixed with the black diesel exhaust. The tractor stalled forward momentum. The earth was fighting back. A modern machine with sensors would have flashed a red warning on a digital screen. It would have automatically lifted the hydraulics to save the engine block. The 1980 John Deere had no sensors. It didn't know how to quit. The solid steel frame of the Oliver wasn't engineered to flex. It was a pure, brutal contest between the tensile strength of cold-rolled steel and the density of packed clay. Merle didn't lift the hydraulics. He slammed the throttle forward. Engine RPM screamed. "Brake," Merle whispered. Crack! A muffled detonation under the earth. A shock wave traveled up the frame and shook the cab. It wasn't the sound of steel snapping. It was the sound of the hardpan shattering. The tractor lurched forward. The point sank 24 inches deep. As the machine crawled across the field, it left deep, jagged fractures trailing behind it. The topsoil wasn't flipped. It wasn't smoothed over. It was sliced open, deep, ugly wounds exposing the dark earth underneath. Vance's smile vanished. He lowered the binoculars. From the fence line, he watched massive slabs of hardened clay heave upward and crumble behind the machine. Merle drove the rig parallel to the road, 30 feet away from Vance. He didn't turn his head. He didn't glare. He didn't raise a middle finger. He looked straight ahead, eyes locked on the horizon. The absolute, deafening silence of his indifference hit the corporate evaluator harder than a physical blow. Vance stood there holding a useless piece of paper, watching an old man tear his data to pieces. But dragging iron through dirt doesn't make a miracle. That is the secret men like Vance never learned in their air-conditioned classrooms. You don't use force to fix nature. You use time. You create the fracture, and you let the earth do the heavy lifting. December. Blizzards swept across the plains. A foot of snow blanketed the field. Apex Capital escalated the psychological warfare. Certified letters arrived from the bank every Tuesday. Vance left voicemails on David's phone, his voice flat and clinical. The ground is frozen. The asset value is dropping. No lender will front seed money for dead dirt. Sign the paper. David paced the living room floor, dark circles under his eyes. He looked at his father. Merle sat in a worn recliner by the wood stove, running an oiled rag over the barrel of a Winchester shotgun. "Dad, we ripped it." "But so what?" David's voice shook. "It's just chunks of hard clay out there. Winter hit. Everything is frozen solid. Seeds won't take in that. Should we just call the broker?" Merle stopped wiping the barrel. He reached over to the side table, picked up the bank's final demand letter, stamped in red ink. He crumpled it into a tight ball, tossed it into the fire. It hissed, flared, and turned to ash. "Nature doesn't work on a corporate fiscal schedule, son," Merle said softly. "You know what winter is doing to those fractures we opened up? The magic of physics. Water. During the day, the snow on the surface melted. The water didn't pool and evaporate like it used to. It drained. It fell directly into the 24-inch deep gashes the Oliver had left behind. It seeped into the micro-cracks of the shattered hardpan. At night, the temperature plummeted to 10 below zero. When water freezes, it expands by 9%. Millions of gallons of freezing water under the surface generated a lateral pressure stronger than any diesel engine ever built. A silent, brutal, microscopic crushing force. It pulverized the remaining chunks of the hardpan into pebbles. The sun came up. The ice melted. The water sank deeper. The sun went down. It froze again. It expanded again. The freeze-thaw cycle, over and over, for 4 straight months. Mother Nature was running a deep tillage operation while the corporate suits slept in heated apartments. Merle took a sip of black coffee. Let 'em send letters. Let 'em run spreadsheets. We opened the chest cavity. Now you stay quiet and wait. Spring thaw. The ice retreated from the Iowa plains. When Vance and the bank liquidator returned in mid-April carrying a judge-signed foreclosure warrant, they didn't pull up to the driveway. They parked half a mile down the county road. David's tractor was moving across the field, pulling a planter. Contrary to the radar models, the seed tubes weren't dragging across concrete. They were slicing into the soil like a hot knife through butter. The entire 500-acre plot was loose, aerated. Oxygen was flowing 2 feet down. Dormant microbes were waking up. Last night's heavy spring rain had absorbed completely. Not a single puddle reflected the morning sun. Vance stepped out of his SUV. His face was pale. He jogged to the edge of the ditch, pulled a steel soil probe rod from his trunk, and jammed it into the dirt. It sank to the hilt. 0 resistance. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face. He stared at the hole in the ground. His hand trembled against the steel handle. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool breeze. Impossible, Vance muttered, stepping backward. The data. The density was 2.1. The field didn't care about his data. It only spoke in life. The real punishment for arrogance came that summer. A brutal drought hit the Midwest. Farms that used corporate disc harrows watched thousands of acres of corn turn brown and wither. Their roots were trapped in the top 6 inches, baking in the sun, unable to reach the moisture below. But on Merle's land, the roots dove straight through the shattered hardpan. They pushed 24 inches deep. They tapped directly into the cold, deep water reserves stored from the winter freeze. While the rest of Redland County baked into a yellow wasteland, the Hutchins farm stood like an oasis. Deep, dark green stalks, thick, towering plants, heavy ears of corn pointing to the sky. October, harvest day. The local grain elevator was a madhouse of idling trucks. Vance stood in the shadows near the office door. He was currently facing termination from Apex Capital for gross miscalculation of a prime asset. Dark bags under his eyes. His tailored suit looked baggy. The Hutchins 18-wheeler backed slowly onto the electronic scale. The massive red LED numbers above the office flashed. The digits climbed and climbed. The weighmaster, a heavy-set man in grease-stained coveralls, stood up from his desk. He let out a piercing whistle, grabbed the PA microphone. "Merle! David! What the hell did you boys do out there?" His voice boomed over the loudspeakers, echoing off the metal silos. 245 bushels an acre. I repeat, 245. County average is sitting at 160. You didn't just clear your debt. You just broke the state record for the decade. The loud hum of diesel engines seemed to fade. The truck drivers standing around the lot went dead silent, staring at the flashing red numbers. Then a slow wave of applause started rolling through the crowd. David stepped out of the truck cab. He stood tall. He turned his head and locked eyes with Vance in the shadows. All the polished theories, all the satellite algorithms, all the arrogant threats, crushed to dust under the weight of those flashing red numbers. The Ivy League superiority had been violently dismantled by a piece of scrap iron from 1967 and a man with dirt under his fingernails. The execution was absolute and silent. Vance was fired by Apex Capital 2 weeks later. His valuation reports were flagged as liabilities. The last rumor in town said he was doing entry-level data entry for a third-tier fertilizer distributor in Ohio. His iPad stripped of its power to ruin lives. With a yield of 245 bushels in a drought year, crop prices were sky-high. Merle and David walked into the bank and cleared their debt with a single stroke of a pen. A cold morning in early November, exactly 1 year after Vance first stepped onto the dirt. The mail carrier dropped an envelope in the Hutchins mailbox. Inside was the lien release, heavy cardstock, stamped in bright red ink. a legally binding ironclad guarantee that the 500 acres belonged to the Hutchins family, untouchable. Merle sat in the wooden rocking chair on his front porch, wearing the same denim jacket, frayed white at the elbows. He pulled the document from the envelope. His gray eyes scanned the red stamp. He didn't shout. He didn't celebrate. He didn't call the neighbors to brag. He folded the paper into a neat square, tucked it into his breast pocket. He picked up his mug of black coffee, took a slow sip, and looked out across the field. The dirt was ripped open again, ready to welcome the freezing silence of another winter. The lesson from the Iowa dirt isn't just about farming. It is a mirror of the human mind. There will be times when society or the experts in your life look at your failures and tell you that you are dead dirt. They will measure your surface scars and tell you there is no coming back. They will offer pennies for your worth. But they don't understand that the flashy solutions, the shallow self-help books, the modern psychological quick fixes are just corporate disc harrows. They fluff up the surface to make you look presentable to the world, but they pack down the trauma and the fear deep inside your chest. To truly revive yourself, you don't need to look pretty. You have to find your raw, unpolished core values. You have to grab the iron. You have to endure the agonizing pain of shattering your own hardpan, the ego, the fear, the cowardice built up over years of taking the easy way out. And when you rip those deep fractures open, you let the critics laugh. You stay quiet. You let patience, discipline, and time do the heavy lifting. Time is the most brutal executioner of arrogant men. True power is never about who screams the loudest. It is about knowing exactly how deep your roots go. If this story hit a hardpan inside your chest, if it woke up a quiet resilience and a demand for absolute self-sovereignty, leave the words "silent and deep" in the comments below. Hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel. Share this with a man or a woman who needs a steady anchor in the middle of a storm. We'll see you in the next one.